We are visiting with Doug Thorpe. Doug Thorpe is talking to us about building better teams by becoming a better leader. And Doug, we've been talking a lot about the attributes, the 6 attributes that you have in your team trust model. But there's some other issues I know that you want to talk about. Kind of give us a recap of that conversation, and then we'll move forward.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. You know, the idea of how do we build a better team has been written about by some great business writers like Stephen Covey and John Collins. And, you know, they use interesting phrases like get the right people on the bus. And while I think those are absolutely true, I guess the direction I'm coming from and why I call this building better teams by becoming a better leader, I firmly believe it's the leader's role to kind of set the course for what the team's going to be doing. And absolutely, once you get a vision, you've got to try to recruit for and train up the right people to be on it. But finding that moment of clarity to communicate to everybody is so critical. And I can't tell you time and time again, I'll go into a client's operation and find out that there is a giant question mark hovering over the whole enterprise. The leader thinks they've done a good job of telling a story, or, you know, maybe they've got a fancy vision statement on the wall and everybody's supposed to just automatically get it. But when you get that team assembled in a room and you start having that discussion, it's amazing how many times there really isn't that perfect clarity.
And, you know, you say perfect clarity. I've even bumped into situations myself in the work I do. There is almost no clarity. And I smiled when you said that sign on the wall, in that case, a mission or a vision statement. And a lot of times that's the lip service. We put up the sign, we work up the vision statement, and then we just stick it on the wall and say, well, that takes care of it.
Right. That's right. And I routinely see teams that have come together and there's a lot of assumption about what the purpose is and, you know, why everybody is gathered. But yet, when you really start polling and you say, all right, this means X, Y, and Z, you'll get 2 or 3 hands around the table going, no, I don't think we do that here. I don't think that's what we are about. And then that's where the leader needs to be able to bring that clarity. So I guess the bottom line, you might say, if you're the leader, manager, owner, you can't assume anything about the understanding of that clarity. And that clarity is so critical for your team to be able to rally around it, make a personal commitment to participate in that, and then carry the process forward.
What are some ways that we can help the leader? I mean, as you say, in your opinion, it centers around this leader. What are some things we can do to help them?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm thinking about a case in point recently I had a client. I was actually asked to come attend a team meeting event where people were being gathered. They don't normally get to work close to each other because they're geographically dispersed, but they do make it a habit to periodically come together. And I asked the question, does everybody understand why you're here and what you're doing? And they looked at me like I had a third eye. But then I said, no, seriously, can each of you articulate the purpose for this team? And sure enough, as I recall, there were 9 members of that team. We had 8 different answers for what the real core purpose of the team was. It was an eye-opener to the executive who was running the team. He was certain he had done a good job of communicating the clarity, and both as a team and one-on-one when he was talking with his people. But in fact, it was obvious that wasn't the case. So the agenda for the day became more about resetting that vision, trying to achieve the clarity so that then he could ask for the commitment from the team on what they were doing.
Just to ask you in that example, if you recall, what was the impression on the team, on the leader of that team, when you went around the room, polled everybody, and he saw what has happened or what was happening? What kind of impression did he have?
Well, fortunately, this executive was a pretty capable leader with some good mileage and good experience behind him. So while on one hand, I think he was disappointed to hear that the clarity was missing, he was quick to own up and in our earlier segment, I talked about the acronym FAST that stands for focus, accountability, simplicity, and transparency. In this case, he became incredibly transparent and said, guys, wow, we need to take a step back and we need to dive into this because it is important that we have this clarity around what we're doing.
Let's talk a little bit about clarity. I suspect that some of our listeners are not sure exactly when you talk about clarity what you're really talking about. Can you help us define that?
Yeah, in simple terms, it's the idea. Let's take the situation of an entrepreneur who has this brilliant idea for the business they want to create. Well, in your mind, it's crystal clear. You know what kind of product you want to create, what kind of service you want to deliver, all the different attributes. And so you begin building this team around you, and the clarity you might have in your own mind is not necessarily shared by everyone on the team. So it is very important. And it does go back. Also in our first segment, we talked about my 6-step team trust model. Step one is the people, they have to ask the question, do I even want to be on this team? 2 is the purpose, and 3 is the plan. That's where the leader really needs to plot the course. They need to be able to get everybody to rally around the right purpose with the right plan. So then the individual can vote, with his heart and his mind to make a commitment to the team.
Let's talk about that. As you said, vote with to the commitment, so to speak. What are some ways or a way that when I'm trying to develop this clarity with my team, that I really know that they're understanding and getting that feedback? In other words, it's not just a yes answer, yes, I understand, or whatever. What are some ways that I can check in, so to speak, to make sure that they are on board with what we're doing?
Well, again, a great question. I think in the spirit of trying to build a high level of trust for your team, the leader needs to be willing to establish that one-on-one relationship with each team member. And in that process of talking one-on-one with your team, you need to ask those questions. You can ask for feedback. If you just came out of a team meeting and somebody you can tell by their body language is balking or not so sure about what you're talking about, pull them off to the side, very calmly and politely ask for feedback. Say, what did you hear? I sensed a pause in your spirit about what we're doing here. And, the person could have been vocal or maybe they weren't vocal, but you saw indications they weren't getting it. So you've got to take that person offline and try to work with them and find out exactly where they are.
My sense of this is, particularly if I have a new team, say I have a new business or I'm growing a business and I've added people fairly quickly as I'm growing, I'm being successful, so to speak, in one sense of the word, that I've got some real work to do as a leader to make sure each one of those team members, particularly as they're newer, if you will, to the business, to the company, that they are on board, that they get it, and again they buy into it and are willing to support it. Any advice there of what to do? I mean, you had the meeting. You just mentioned an example where you pulled one off to the side that you were able to tell wasn't connecting or on the same page. What about? I mean, this is a project. I mean, this is something you got to work on.
Yeah, it is. It's really an ongoing project. It is a challenge for leadership to stay with it, stay the course, work through this process. But that's why my experience has shown me that this team trust model that I'm an advocate of is such an interesting roadmap to get your team to higher levels of performance. Specific to your question, that individual that's kind of lagging, if the rest of the team is on pace and getting it, if the right level of trust has been established, they help each other. They pull each other along. They realize when someone is not getting it or having a challenge, perhaps something in the business has changed and 5 out of 6 have gotten it and that 6th person is lagging or missing it. They actually end up helping themselves as a team pull together, bring that person along, and actually help the leader by not putting the 100% responsibility on the leader to make that happen.
You know, you've said something really important, and I want to make sure that our listeners all get it, and that's the fact that this process, if you will, is ongoing. It isn't just the meeting, then checking in with people that may or may not get it, but it really needs to become part of the, I call the DNA of that leader going forward on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis.
It really is. When we began this discussion, we said the ultimate success of a team really starts with the leader, and that is true. And it does require a constant monitoring, a constant feedback to the team members by the leaders saying, you know, yes, we're on course. No, we need to adjust something. I had an expectation of such and such, and, you know, I need you to step it up, pick it up, talk to me why you're not getting this, you know, those kinds of discussions.
Sounds like what you're doing is really building a model to build the business. And as such, the leader needs to be, and hopefully all the team members involved in it day to day, and probably some subtle ways as well as some obvious ways.
Yeah, and we have spoken about the idea of hiring is so critically important to that. And I think John Collins in his book, Good to Great, talks about that exhaustively, having done a number of studies on big businesses and how they've been able to do it. You know, I guess, not to be crude about it, but the old saying, garbage in is garbage out. If you haven't been able to hire the right people to be on your team, that's going to make it a near impossible adjustment to make. So starting with the right people on your team is certainly critical to being able to align everybody, explain the purpose, show them your plan, and then talk about how you're going to execute.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. Once you get the clarity working with your team, are there some other things you can do to build a better, stronger team?
Yeah, I go back to the 6-step model, which we've shared here, and there is an online version of this on my website, dougthorpe.com/team trust, one word. That's dougthorpe.com/team trust. The other steps involve, as once everybody is aligned with the team, the purpose and the plan, then you get into practice. And you're out in the trenches doing the job, doing the work, and you have to have kind of a constant feedback process to say, well, is this effort working? What do we need to adjust? If it's a major shift, you got to have some education and learning to help your team understand what the change is. And in a fashion, they potentially go all the way back to step one in the model here, asking themselves, wow, with that change, do I still want to be on this team? So it is an ever dynamic loop. And some clients I've worked with that they look at this, they almost challenge and say, well, is this not really similar to Maslow's hierarchy? You start out at step one with basic fundamental needs, and you work your way up to self-actualization. And a team goes through that kind of process as well. They start out at a very fundamental level. Who am I? Why am I here? What are we doing? And then you slowly work up the process until you finally achieve your payoff. And then with the payoff in hand, and again, that's either monetary or intangible, as in the case of many nonprofits. With that payoff in hand, you can go back to that front end and say, okay, this is good. Why am I here? Oh, this is great. I want to stay here and let's do it some more.
Well, and that makes a lot of sense, is getting that buy-in and someone recognizing that they're where they need to be. Well, let me ask you this. Okay, we've talked about this building, using the model, the team trust model, building that trust up to a point. Kind of double back and look back over that for us, if you would, and talk about really what are the real benefits of using this approach.
The first big benefit is the idea that with your team hitting on all 6 cylinders here, you actually start to create big momentum for your business. And you cannot underestimate the value of momentum. We hear it talked about in sporting events. The team recovers a fumble and starts driving back for a winning touchdown. They talk about big momentum shifts. Well, in business, momentum is actually very tangible also. And if your team is really hitting it and doing well, working together as a well-oiled machine might, you sense that momentum. And what momentum does for you is you might lose a member of your team, life change or whatever takes them away. Putting another person in that slot, if the team is already operating at a high level, that momentum is going to carry them even through that transition with the new member.
You know, Doug, you were talking about momentum and how important it is, and you woke me up a little bit. I'll be frank with you about, of course, the momentum in sports. I agree. It's in the current basketball playoffs. It's everything, baseball, football, all around us in sports. But I'm not sure that I even think about it that often, that the momentum, once a business is moving and growing, we read these success stories about all the noise that goes on when you're moving forward and everybody's excited and everybody's pulling. But what that is you're saying, is a direct result of using a model such as the team trust model and building up your team so that they can create that momentum.
Right. Yeah, I think it's safe to say if you take the counter position and think about that, I don't know any business that I can think of in my past that is achieving levels of success with constant conflict, frustration, turnover, retraining, re-educating the team. I don't know any business that is able to achieve their maximum capacity when that all is going on. So that's what I'm talking about with momentum, is when you overcome those things and you start getting a regular rhythm to your business and kind of a hum to the activity that's going on. It's seldom that you see a business that has that hum that's not doing some great things.
You know, you touched on some important things. You touched on some things that are, I guess, call them negatives in a general sense, where you have turnover and you have this and that. And if that's going on in your business, that in itself is a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're not doing well if you're not addressing those issues. But then it becomes a recovery effort. If I've got a lot of turnover, my approach typically is, well, I've got to fix that problem. It's not to step back and say, hey, maybe I need to find a new way overall. How do you convince someone that they need, they say, well, I've got a lot of turnover, Doug, help me with this. How do you convince them to step back and take a look at something like the team trust model?
Well, I've definitely had that occasion with a client when he presents me with all of his problems and I start proposing some changes and I get pushback, and he'll say things like, well, this is the way we've always done it. And the classic retort from me is, well, how's that working out for you? You just gave me a list of problems, and don't you think they go hand in hand? So there are business situations when ultimately you say to somebody, why don't you just start this over with a different plan?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I would assume it'd be very challenging to bring that up to somebody that has the obvious signs. And if you're listening to this program, I mean, take a look at your own business. See if you have some of these recurring problems and you can't seem to get past them. And I think it's because you're just trying to fix that problem. You're not addressing the whole. Well, Doug, as we wind down this part of our conversation, I think it'd be a great idea, if you don't mind, share with us some case studies, some actual cases or situations that you've been in that reflect the real value of following the team trust model.
Yeah, one that comes immediately to mind, I know of a situation where the team is comprised of some very highly skilled, highly trained, highly technical people, and the team leader made the quick assumption that everybody got it, that the team had been constituted for a particular mission. I think the team leader was thinking, well, these guys are smart. They've been doing this a long time. Certainly, we can just go to work and everything will be fine. And yet, when the team was pulled together and the discussion about clarity came up, which I basically ask every team meeting I'm in just to get a gauge on where they might be, The answer was no. I've got my P's, he's got his P's, her P's, et cetera, et cetera. So the assumption based on technical expertise is not a good one. I think it goes without saying that regardless of the skill and education of your people, there's still always that need for that, proverbial flag to go in the sand for everybody to rally around and say, no, this is what we're about. This is what we need to be doing. Now let's have the discussion. How can we leverage our strengths and talents to get there?
Well, yeah, that old word assumption, we know about that. It bites each and every time. Why not right here?
Right.
Makes sense that happens.
Right.
Any other case studies jump out in your mind that would help people understand or tangibilize, so to speak?
Well, I'll tell a story on myself. I have alluded to it before, and in my own experience trying to start up a company, I was too quick to assume that everybody could understand the mission. I thought we had a very clear definition of the service we were going to be providing. I thought it was pretty simple to understand. And as I brought people into the team, the training was marginal at best. And I'm telling a story on myself. Training was marginal at best. And then people were handed a book of business to go get busy on. And next thing I knew, things were popping up. Pieces of the deliverables that we were responsible for were not getting done correctly. And the service levels my company was delivering were not that great. So it took some real adjustment to the process with the people I had. I got real aggressive with evaluating who I had and made some intentional cuts to the team. Changed my whole recruiting practice. In this case, I actually created a practical test I gave recruits to not just talk me through what they thought they knew about our business, but show me what they knew about our business. My success in recruiting went, I would say through the roof, and the ability to have a team that was operating at a much higher level grew very rapidly after that.
One of the things, just kind of pick on one little issue, and we've talked about it really in our first conversation and now in this conversation, is a leader really needs to develop some skills as far as evaluating hiring people.
Yeah.
I hear that time and again. Any quick thoughts on that to encourage someone to develop those skills?
Well, I think the quick answer is, not to make it sound oversimplified, but if you're not happy with the quality of hires you're making, something's got to change. You either need to reevaluate your own process or your own decision making, or find better alternatives on how to evaluate that. Like I mentioned in my example, I actually created a practical test to give to recruits rather than talking through the business, because our business was one that was, a lot of people knew the vocabulary of the industry and could talk it through without really knowing anything about the work at all. So we created this practical test, and that really made a change. I actually had recruits, we told them they were going to take a practical test, and they declined the interview.
Wow. That is interesting in and of itself.
Yep.
Yeah, a lot of traps out there in the interviewing process, and it's something I've personally been blessed to have a lot of opportunity for training and attend seminars, and I've molded a process together, and it's a never learning thing. But obviously, it's a key to a successful business. There's just no doubt about it. Hiring the right people for the right slot.
Absolutely.
Well, Doug, I've enjoyed this part of the conversation as I did the first. I think I'm kind of excited. We're going to have a third conversation and kind of bring everything into focus, so to speak. And I hope you as listeners have enjoyed this and re-listen to it. There's a lot of good takeaways in this conversation. So, Doug, thanks, and we'll be with you again next week.
OneBestConsult.com, a community of small business owners where you as an owner can find answers to the most pressing business questions you have. Not sure who to turn to when you have a challenge in your business? Turn to the folks at OneBestConsult.com. That's the number one, bestconsult.com, where you can always find advice you can use based on common sense business experience. Join our community of like-minded business owners at onebestconsult.com.